The dying woman's whispered prayer was barely audible over the howling wind that swept across the Nebraska plains in late January of 1876. But Beckett Jamison heard it clearly enough as his horse stumbled upon what he had initially mistaken for a snow-covered log beside the frozen road leading out of Red Cloud. He dismounted in an instant, his boots crunching through the icy crust, and knelt beside the figure buried halfway in the snowbank. Frost clung to her eyelashes, and her lips had taken on a dangerous blue tint. She wore nothing but a thin cotton dress, torn at the sleeves, and her dark hair lay matted against her pale face. When she opened her eyes at his touch, he saw they were the color of storm clouds, filled with a haunting emptiness that made his chest tighten. "Let me be," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, just let me go." Beckett shook his head firmly, already shrugging out of his heavy sheepskin coat. "Not today, madam, not on my watch." He wrapped the coat around her shivering frame and lifted her into his arms with surprising gentleness for a man of his size. She weighed almost nothing, and he could feel her bones through the thin fabric of her dress. "I have got you now. You are safe." She tried to protest, but her words came out as little more than unintelligible murmurs. Beckett secured her on his horse before mounting behind her, keeping one arm wrapped firmly around her waist to hold her upright against his chest. The ride back into Red Cloud took nearly 20 minutes through the blinding snow, and with each passing moment, he could feel her body growing limper in his grasp. His small cabin on the edge of town had never seemed so far away. When they finally arrived, he carried her inside and laid her on the bed near the potbelly stove, which still held embers from that morning. He worked quickly, stoking the fire until flames roared to life, then turned his attention back to the woman who lay trembling violently beneath every blanket he owned. "Can you hear me?" he asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I need to know your name." Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on him with difficulty. "Eleanor," she managed. "Eleanor Brooks." "Well, Miss Brooks, I am Beckett Jamison, and you are going to survive this night whether you want to or not." He stood and moved to the kitchen area, heating water and preparing broth from the venison he had been saving. "When did you last eat?" She did not answer, and when he glanced back, he saw that her eyes had closed again. For a terrifying moment, he thought she had slipped away, but then he saw the shallow rise and fall of her chest. He brought the warm broth to her bedside and spent the next hour coaxing small sips past her lips, speaking to her constantly to keep her conscious. "That is it," he encouraged when she managed to swallow. "Just a little more, you need your strength." "Why?" The word came out broken and raw. "Why did you not just leave me there?" Beckett set down the bowl and looked at her directly, his blue eyes serious beneath the brim of his hat, which he had not yet removed. "Because every life has value, Miss Brooks, even when we cannot see it ourselves." Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, tracking down her temples into her hair. "You do not understand. You do not know what I have done, what has been done to me." "Then tell me," he said quietly. "But first, you need to get warm and rest. We have time for stories later." He spent that entire night in the chair beside the bed, monitoring her breathing, adding wood to the stove, and occasionally pressing his hand to her forehead to check her temperature. By dawn, her shivering had subsided, and a faint hint of color had returned to her cheeks. She slept more peacefully then, and Beckett finally allowed himself to doze, his head tipping forward onto his chest. When Eleanor woke hours later, sunlight was streaming through the cabin's single window, and the smell of coffee filled the air. She found herself in a stranger's bed, wearing a man's shirt that hung nearly to her knees, with no memory of how she had gotten there. Panic seized her, and she sat up quickly, her heart racing. "Easy now," came a calm voice from across the room. The cowboy from the Snowbank stood at the stove, his back to her. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sandy brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. "You are safe here, I promise you that." Eleanor pulled the blankets up to her chin, her mind racing. "Where are my clothes?" Drying by the fire. They were soaked through. He turned to face her, and she saw that his face was handsome in a weathered, honest way, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. "I did not look," he added quickly, seeming to read her thoughts. "I turned my back and only helped you enough to keep you from freezing. You needed dry clothes." She studied him for a long moment, searching for deception in his expression and finding none. "Why are you helping me?" Beckett poured 2 cups of coffee and brought one to her, keeping a respectful distance. "Seems like you needed help. Would you rather I had not?" "Yes," she said immediately, but her hands trembled as she accepted the warm cup. "I had made my choice. You had no right to interfere." "Maybe not," he agreed, settling into the chair he had occupied all night. "But I did it anyway. Now that you are here and alive, maybe you could tell me what drove you out into that storm with nothing but a torn dress." Eleanor sipped the coffee, letting the warmth spread through her chest. She did not want to tell him. She did not want to speak the words aloud to make them real again. But something in his steady gaze made her feel that he would listen without judgment, and the burden of carrying her story alone had become too heavy. "I was married," she began quietly, "to a man named Thomas Brooks. We came to Nebraska 3 years ago with dreams of building a farm, starting a family. He was kind at first, or so I thought, but kindness can hide many sins until you are trapped too far from help to escape." Beckett's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, letting her continue at her own pace. "He drank," Eleanor went on, her voice flat. "And when he drank, he became someone else entirely, someone cruel. I learned to make myself small, to stay quiet, to hide, but it was never enough. 2 weeks ago, he came home in a rage about money, about the farm failing, about everything being my fault. He hit me harder than he ever had before. I fell and struck my head on the corner of the table. When I woke up, he was standing over me, and I saw something in his eyes that told me if I did not leave that night, I would not survive another week." "So you ran," Beckett said. "I ran," she confirmed. "I took nothing but the dress on my back and walked for 2 days until I reached Red Cloud. I tried to find work, tried to find shelter, but nobody wanted to help a married woman who had abandoned her husband. They said I should go home, that a wife's place is with her husband no matter what. I had nowhere to go and no money for passage back east. When the storm hit yesterday, I just walked out of town. I thought freezing would be peaceful, easier than going back. I prayed for God to take me quickly." Beckett was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "God did not take you, Miss Brooks. Instead, he sent you help. Maybe that is worth considering." "You do not understand," Eleanor said, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I am still married. I have nothing. I am nothing. You saved my life, but for what? So I can starve in the streets instead of freezing in the snow." "You are not nothing," Beckett said firmly. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "And you are not going to starve. You can stay here as long as you need until we figure out what comes next. I have a spare room I can fix up, and I give you my word as a gentleman that you will be safe under my roof." Eleanor wanted to argue, to tell him that such an arrangement was impossible, that it would ruin both their reputations. But the truth was that she had no other options, and the warmth of the cabin, the full belly from the broth he had given her, and the first night of peaceful sleep she had experienced in months, had awakened something in her that she thought had died. A tiny, fragile spark of hope. "I cannot repay you," she said quietly. "I am not asking you to." Beckett stood and moved back to the stove. Are you hungry? I can make eggs and biscuits. I should not accept, Eleanor said, even as her stomach growled audibly at the mention of food. But yes, I am starving. The corner of Beckett's mouth lifted in the ghost of a smile. Then we start there. One meal at a time, Miss Brooks, one day at a time. Over the next week, Eleanor began to heal in ways that went beyond the physical. Beckett kept his word, converting the small storage room into a modest bedroom with a proper bed, fresh linens, and even a small mirror on the wall. He never pressed her for more information about her past, never made her feel like a burden despite the fact that she contributed little beyond helping with cooking and mending his clothes. She learned that Beckett worked as a ranch hand for the Circle J Ranch just outside Red Cloud, that he had fought in the war when he was barely 19, and that he had come west seeking the kind of peace that could not be found in the crowded cities of the East. He read books in the evenings, mostly poetry and philosophy, which surprised her given his rough exterior. He had a gentle way with animals, and a quick laugh that emerged more often as she grew comfortable around him. "You are different than most men I have known," Eleanor told him one evening as they sat by the fire. She was mending a tear in his work shirt, her needle moving in neat, precise stitches. "How so?" Beckett asked, looking up from the volume of Whitman he had been reading. "You are kind without expecting anything in return. You listen more than you speak. You treat me like a person, not a possession." Beckett closed his book and studied her thoughtfully. "My mother raised me right, I suppose. She always said that the measure of a man is not how he treats his equals, but how he treats those who cannot fight back. Any man who would raise a hand to a woman is no man at all in my book." Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Beckett said, a note of sadness entering his voice. "She died of fever when I was 17. My father followed her 6 months later. I think he died of a broken heart more than anything else. They loved each other something fierce." "You must miss them terribly." "Every day," he admitted. "But I try to honor them by living the way they taught me, doing right by people, helping where I can, being honest even when it is hard." They fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that comes between people who are beginning to truly know one another. Eleanor found herself watching Beckett when he was not looking, noticing the way his hands moved with careful precision whether he was chopping wood or turning the pages of his book, the way his eyes crinkled when something amused him, the way he hummed softly to himself when he thought she could not hear. It terrified her, these feelings that were slowly taking root in her heart. She had sworn to herself that she would never trust a man again, never allow herself to be vulnerable, never risk the pain that came with giving your heart to another person. But Beckett was making it impossible to keep those walls intact. 2 weeks after he had found her in the Snowbank, a knock came at the door just after sunset. Beckett answered it to find Sheriff Morrison standing on the porch, his hat in his hands and a grim expression on his weathered face. "Evening, Beckett," the sheriff said. "Mind if I come in?" Beckett stepped aside, and Eleanor felt her blood turn to ice when the lawman's eyes landed on her. She stood quickly from her chair by the fire, her hands clutching the skirt of the dress Beckett had bought for her in town. "Miss Brooks," Sheriff Morrison said with a nod, "I have been looking for you. Your husband has filed a report claiming you stole from him and ran off. He wants you brought home." "That is a lie," Eleanor said, her voice shaking. "I took nothing but myself. I left because he was killing me piece by piece." The sheriff sighed heavily. "I am not saying I do not believe you, madam, but the law is the law. A wife belongs with her husband. I have got to take you back to your homestead." "She is not going anywhere," Beckett said quietly, but there was steel in his voice that Eleanor had never heard before. He moved to stand beside her, his presence solid and protective. Not back to a man who beats her. "Now, Beckett, I understand you wanting to help, but this is not your business," Sheriff Morrison said, though he looked distinctly uncomfortable. "I have got a legal obligation here." "Then I will make it my business," Beckett replied. "Eleanor is under my protection. If Thomas Brooks wants her back, he will have to go through me first." "You are talking about defying the law," the sheriff warned. "I am talking about protecting someone who cannot protect herself," Beckett countered. "Tell me honestly, Sheriff. If you take her back to that homestead, do you think she will survive the winter?" Sheriff Morrison was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving between Beckett and Eleanor. Finally, he settled his hat back on his head and moved toward the door. "I did not find her here," he said carefully. "As far as I am concerned, Miss Brooks must have moved on to another town. I will tell Thomas Brooks that I looked but could not locate her. That should buy you some time." "Thank you," Eleanor whispered, tears of relief streaming down her face. After the sheriff left, Beckett turned to her, his expression serious. "He bought us time, but not much. Thomas will not give up easily if he thinks you are still around. Men like him do not let go of what they consider their property." "What do I do?" Eleanor asked, wrapping her arms around herself. "I cannot run forever." "You should not have to run at all," Beckett said. He reached out and gently took her hand, the first time he had deliberately touched her since that night in the snowbank. "Eleanor, there might be a way to keep you safe permanently, but I need to ask you something first, and I need you to be honest with me." "Anything," she said, acutely aware of the warmth of his palm against hers. "You want to be free of him, truly free in a way that the law will recognize." "More than anything," she said fervently. "But divorce is nearly impossible, especially for a woman. The courts would never grant me one." "Not divorce," Beckett said slowly. "But there is another way. If Thomas Brooks were to die, you would be a widow, free to make your own choices." Eleanor pulled her hand back, horror washing over her. "You cannot be suggesting what I think you are. I will not have murder on my conscience, Beckett. I will not have you become a killer on my account." "No," he said quickly. "No, I would never. I am sorry I explained that poorly. I meant that Thomas is a drunk and a violent man living alone on a failing farm in the middle of winter. Those sorts of circumstances have a way of leading to tragic accidents. Men fall through ice, get kicked by horses, freeze to death in storms. If he were to meet with such an accident, nobody would question it too closely." "You want to wait for him to die naturally?" Eleanor asked, confused. "I want you to consider another option entirely," Beckett said. He took a deep breath, as if steadying himself for what came next. "Marry me." Eleanor stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What, marry me?" he repeated, more confidently this time. "Not for love, not yet anyway, though I hope that might come in time, but marry me for protection. As my wife, you would have legal standing, you would be safe. Thomas could not touch you. And when enough time has passed that people have forgotten about the circumstances, we could figure out the rest." "Beckett, that is insane," Eleanor said, though her heart was racing. "You barely know me. Why would you bind yourself to someone else's broken wife?" "You are not broken," he said firmly. "You are one of the strongest people I have ever met. You survived years of abuse and still have kindness left in you. You did not let that man destroy who you are. As for barely knowing you, I know enough. I know you are gentle with animals and that you hum when you cook. I know you read the same passages in books twice because you want to remember the exact words. I know you cry in your sleep sometimes but wake up determined to face another day. That is enough for me. But what about you?" Eleanor asked, her voice breaking. "You deserve someone whole, someone who can give you a real marriage." "I want someone real," Beckett said. "And you are the most real person I have met in a long time. I am not asking you to love me, Eleanor. I am asking you to let me help you. Everything else can come later or not at all. The choice would be yours." Eleanor turned away from him, moving to the window where she could see the snow-covered street of red cloud. Everything in her life had been decided by someone else for so long. Her father had chosen Thomas for her. Thomas had controlled every aspect of her existence. Even running away had been a reaction to someone else's actions rather than a true choice of her own. But this, what Beckett was offering, felt different. It felt like the first real decision she would make for herself. "If I say yes," she said quietly, "it would not be fair to you. I do not know if I can ever be a proper wife. I do not know if I can let anyone close enough to hurt me again." "Then we will take it slow," Beckett said, coming to stand behind her though he did not touch her. "As slow as you need. You will have your own room, your own space. I will not ask for anything you are not ready to give. But you will be safe, and you will be free." "Is that not worth considering?" Eleanor closed her eyes and thought about the alternative. Running again, always looking over her shoulder, never able to settle or build a life. Or worse, being forced back to Thomas, back to the nightmare she had escaped. When she opened her eyes and turned to face Beckett, she saw nothing but honest concern in his expression. No hidden agenda, no manipulation, just a good man trying to do the right thing. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed 3 days later in a quiet ceremony at the church in Red Cloud, with only the minister and his wife as witnesses. Eleanor wore a simple blue dress that Beckett had purchased from the general store, and she carried a small bouquet of dried flowers. Beckett wore his only suit, clean-shaven and nervous in a way that she found oddly endearing. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Beckett did not kiss her, instead simply taking her hand and squeezing it gently, a promise of patience. The news spread through Red Cloud quickly, as news always did in small towns. Most people were scandalized that Beckett Jamison had married a woman who was technically still another man's wife, even if that man lived miles away and had driven her off through his own cruelty. But Beckett weathered the gossip with his usual quiet dignity, and Eleanor held her head high, refusing to be ashamed of choosing to live. A week after their wedding, Thomas Brooks rode into Red Cloud demanding to see the sheriff. Eleanor was at the general store when she saw him through the window, and her blood ran cold. He looked worse than she remembered, thinner and more haggard, with wild eyes and an unsteady gait that suggested he had been drinking even at that early hour. She hurried back to the cabin, her heart pounding, and found Beckett just returning from his work at the ranch. "He is here," she said breathlessly. "Thomas is in town." Beckett's expression hardened. "Stay inside, lock the door, do not open it for anyone but me." "What are you going to do?" "What I have to," he said simply, and then he was gone. Eleanor spent the next hour pacing the cabin, jumping at every sound, imagining terrible scenarios. When she finally heard footsteps on the porch, she almost could not bring herself to look, terrified of who might be on the other side. But it was Beckett's voice that called out, steady and calm. She unlocked the door and threw it open, relief flooding through her. Beckett stood there, his knuckles bruised but otherwise unharmed. Behind him, she could see Sheriff Morrison leading Thomas Brooks away in handcuffs, the man shouting incoherently about theft and betrayal. "What happened?" Eleanor asked. Beckett stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "He came at me swinging in front of half the town. Accused me of stealing his property, said he would kill us both. The sheriff arrested him for assault and public drunkenness. With enough witnesses to testify about his behavior and his threats, he will be locked up for a while. And when he gets out, he will be given a choice to leave the territory or face more serious charges." "Is it really over?" Eleanor asked, afraid to believe it. Not completely, Beckett admitted, but it is a start, and in the eyes of the law, you are my wife now. He has no legal claim to you anymore. We just need to wait him out. Eleanor sank into a chair, the tension that had been holding her upright suddenly releasing. I do not know how to thank you. You already did, Beckett said, settling into the chair across from her. You said yes. You gave me the privilege of standing beside you. That is thanks enough. Over the following months, Eleanor and Beckett built a life together that was strange and wonderful in equal measure. They maintained separate bedrooms, but they shared meals and conversations. Quiet evenings by the fire and early morning coffee before Beckett left for the ranch. Eleanor found work taking in sewing and laundry, contributing to their household finances in a way that made her feel less like a charity case and more like a true partner. Slowly, so slowly that she barely noticed it happening, the walls she had built around her heart began to crumble. She found herself looking forward to Beckett's return each evening, to the sound of his voice and the warmth of his smile. She noticed the way he always made sure she had eaten before he touched his own food, the way he brought her wildflowers he found on the range, the way he read aloud to her in the evenings when her eyes were tired from sewing. One night in late spring, nearly 4 months after their wedding, Eleanor was washing dishes when she felt Beckett's presence behind her. She turned to find him watching her with an expression she had never seen before, something tender and vulnerable that made her breath catch. "What is it?" she asked softly. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to know that I expect nothing in return, but I cannot keep it to myself any longer." Eleanor dried her hands on her apron, her heart beginning to race. "Tell me, I love you," Beckett said simply. "I have loved you for months now, maybe since that first night when you were so determined to give up but fought to live anyway. I love your strength and your kindness. I love the way you hum when you think nobody is listening, and the way you always put extra sugar in my coffee, even though you tell me I should not have it. I love you, Eleanor, and I needed you to know. But I am not asking you to love me back. I am not asking you to change anything about how we live." I just could not go another day without saying it. Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were not tears of fear or pain. They were tears of something she had thought she would never feel again. "You really mean that?" "Every word," Beckett said. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, even if you never feel the same way." Eleanor crossed the small distance between them, and for the first time since their wedding, touched him deliberately. She placed her hand against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. "I have been so afraid," she whispered. "Afraid to feel anything, afraid to trust, afraid that if I let myself love you, I would lose myself again." "You will never lose yourself with me," Beckett promised. "I swear that to you." "I know," Eleanor said, and realized that she truly did. "And that is why I can tell you that I love you too. I think I have for a while now, but I was too scared to admit it. You gave me back my life, Beckett. You gave me a reason to keep living when I had given up. How could I not love you?" Beckett's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. "May I kiss you, please?" Eleanor breathed. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet, nothing like the harsh, demanding kisses she had known in her first marriage. This was a question and an answer, a promise and a beginning. When they finally pulled apart, Eleanor was smiling through her tears, and Beckett looked at her like she was something precious and miraculous. "I want to be your wife," Eleanor said. "Truly your wife in every way. I am ready." "Are you sure?" Beckett asked, searching her face. "There is no rush. We have all the time in the world." "I am sure," Eleanor said. "I have been merely surviving for so long. I want to start living again. With you." That night, Eleanor moved her belongings into Beckett's room, and they began their marriage anew. It was not perfect at first. Eleanor still flinched sometimes at sudden movements, still had nightmares that left her gasping and trembling. But Beckett was patient, always so patient, holding her when she needed it and giving her space when she asked. He learned her triggers and her boundaries, and she learned to trust that his touch meant comfort, not pain. By the time summer arrived, word reached Red Cloud that Thomas Brooks had died in a bar fight in Denver, drunk and belligerent as always. Eleanor felt a strange mix of relief and sadness at the news. Relief that she was truly free now, that there was no longer any threat hanging over her head. But sadness, too, for the man Thomas might have been, for the dreams they had shared before alcohol and anger had poisoned everything. "You feel guilty?" Beckett asked her that evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Eleanor considered the question carefully. "A little," she admitted. "I promised to stay with him until death, and I broke that promise. But I know now that staying would have meant my own death, sooner or later. I cannot feel too guilty for choosing to live." "You should not feel guilty at all," Beckett said, taking her hand in his. "You tried. You did everything you could. Some promises are not meant to be kept, not when keeping them destroys you." "I am grateful every day that you found me in that snowbank," Eleanor said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I was so certain my story was over, but it was just beginning." "Our story was just beginning," Beckett corrected gently. As the months turned into years, Eleanor and Beckett built a life that was rich with love and purpose. They saved enough money to buy a small piece of land on the outskirts of Red Cloud, where they built a modest house with a wide porch and a view of the rolling plains. Eleanor continued her sewing business, gaining a reputation for the finest needlework in 3 counties, while Beckett eventually became foreman at the Circle J Ranch, respected by the men he supervised for his fairness and skill. In the spring of 1878, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She confided her fears to Beckett one night as they lay together in the darkness. "What if I am like my mother?" she whispered. "What if I do not know how to be a good parent?" "You will be a wonderful mother," Beckett assured her, his hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach. "Look at how you care for the animals, how you help the neighbor children with their reading. You have so much love to give, Eleanor. Our child will be blessed to have you." "And what if I see Thomas in this baby's face? What if it brings back all those terrible memories?" "This is our child," Beckett said firmly. "Made from love, not pain. Whatever face this baby has, it will be a face we both adore. And any memories that come, we will face them together. You are not alone anymore." Their son was born in January of 1879, exactly 3 years after Beckett had found Eleanor in the snowbank. They named him Samuel, after Beckett's father, and he had his mother's storm-gray eyes and his father's sandy hair. Eleanor fell in love with him instantly, all her fears dissolving the moment they placed him in her arms. She had never known it was possible to feel such overwhelming protective love for another human being. Beckett proved to be the father Eleanor had always dreamed of having for her children. He was patient and playful, spending hours making wooden toys for Samuel and singing him to sleep with old cowboy ballads. He changed diapers without complaint and walked the floor with the baby when he was fussy, never once suggesting that such tasks were beneath him or solely women's work. "You are a natural," Eleanor told him one evening, watching him cradle their sleeping son. "I had good examples," Beckett replied, "and a very good teacher." He looked at her with such love that it still sometimes took her breath away, even after years of marriage. "Thank you for trusting me enough to build this family with me." "Thank you for giving me a family to build," Eleanor said, "for giving me a life worth living." 2 years later, a daughter joined their family. They named her Rose, and she had her father's blue eyes and her mother's dark hair. Samuel adored his little sister, always wanting to help care for her and show her his treasures. The small house rang with laughter and life, and sometimes Eleanor had to stop and simply look around, overwhelmed by how different her existence had become. The people of Red Cloud, who had once whispered and judged, gradually came to accept and even admire the Jamison family. Eleanor's story, once she felt safe enough to share it, inspired other women in difficult situations to seek help rather than suffer in silence. She became known as someone who would listen without judgment, who would offer shelter to those in need, who understood the courage it took to choose your own life. One evening when Samuel was 7 and Rose was 5, Eleanor found Beckett sitting on the porch alone, staring out at the stars. She settled beside him, taking his hand. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "That day I found you in the snow," he said. "I have never told you this, but I almost did not stop. I was late getting back to town and the storm was getting worse. I thought about just riding past, about leaving whatever was in that snowbank for someone else to find. But something made me look closer, made me stop. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had kept riding." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "But you did not. You stopped. You saved me." "We saved each other," Beckett corrected. "Before I met you, I was just going through the motions of living, working, eating, sleeping, but never really feeling much of anything. You gave me purpose, Eleanor. You gave me a reason to be better, to do better. You made me want to build something meaningful." "I think we have built something pretty wonderful," Eleanor said, gesturing to the house behind them where their children slept peacefully. "A family, a home, a life filled with love. That is more than I ever dreamed possible when I was lying in that snowbank praying for death." "What would you tell that woman now if you could?" Beckett asked. "The one who had given up hope." Eleanor thought about it carefully. "I would tell her that the darkest moment is not the end of the story. I would tell her that there is someone coming who will see her worth even when she cannot see it herself. I would tell her to hold on just a little longer, because everything she has ever wanted is waiting just beyond the storm. And I would tell her that she is stronger than she knows, braver than she believes, and worthy of every good thing that is coming her way." "That is beautiful," Beckett said softly. "It is true," Eleanor replied. "You taught me that, Beckett. You taught me that I was worth saving." "You were always worth saving," he said. "I just helped you remember." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. From inside, they heard Samuel call out for water, and Rose began singing herself to sleep with a made-up song. These were the sounds of their life, the beautiful ordinary moments that Eleanor had never thought she would experience. As the years continued to pass, the Jamison family grew and thrived. Samuel became a skilled horseman like his father, eventually working alongside him at the Circle J Ranch. Rose discovered a talent for music and filled their home with piano melodies. She learned from the traveling teacher who came through Red Cloud twice a year. In 1887, another son arrived, named Thomas after Eleanor's father, a man who had been kind despite his poor judgment in choosing her first husband. This Thomas would grow up knowing only love and gentleness, rewriting the name's legacy in the Jamison family. Eleanor and Beckett grew older together, their hair turning gray and their bodies showing the wear of hard work and good living. But their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened with each passing year, seasoned by shared struggles and triumphs, by the everyday intimacy of a life built together. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1896, Beckett surprised Eleanor with a trip back to the spot where he had found her that winter night so long ago. The road was different now, more traveled and well-maintained, and it was summer rather than winter. But standing there together, Eleanor could still remember exactly how she had felt that night, how certain she had been that her story was ending. "I was wrong," she said aloud, though Beckett had not asked her to speak. "I thought this spot would be where my life ended, but it was where my real life began." "Our real life," Beckett said, pulling her close. "Do you have any regrets?" Eleanor looked up at him, at the face that had become more dear to her than her own reflection, and smiled. "Not a single one. You gave me everything, Beckett. You gave me love, family, purpose, and most importantly, you gave me myself back. How could I regret any part of that?" "I am the one who gained everything," Beckett argued gently. "You made me a husband, a father, a better man than I ever would have been alone. You are my greatest blessing, Eleanor Jamison." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines that had not been there when they first met. "We blessed each other. That is what love does. It makes both people more than they were alone." They returned home that evening to find their children and grandchildren gathered for a surprise celebration. Samuel had brought his wife and their 2 children. Rose had traveled from Denver with her husband. Young Thomas, now 9 years old, had made a crooked cake that collapsed in the middle but tasted perfect anyway. The house was full of noise and laughter and love, exactly as it should be. As Eleanor stood in the doorway watching her family, Beckett came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he murmured. "That I am the luckiest woman alive," she said. "That night in the snowbank, I was praying for death, because I thought my life had no value, no purpose, nowhere to go but down. I could not have been more wrong. Everything good in my life came after that moment. Our love, our children, this beautiful, messy, wonderful existence. You did not just save my life that night, Beckett. You taught me what life could be." "You taught me the same thing," he said. "Before you, I was just existing. You showed me what it meant to truly live, to love with your whole heart, to build something lasting and meaningful. We made each other better, Eleanor. That is what real love does." Inside, their grandson knocked over a pitcher of lemonade and Rose laughed while Samuel scrambled for towels. Thomas was telling an animated story about a frog he had found by the creek, his hands waving wildly. It was chaos and perfection all at once, the beautiful mess of a life well lived and a family well loved. Eleanor turned in Beckett's arms and kissed him, a simple gesture they had shared thousands of times but which still held all the power and promise of that first kiss years ago. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "Come on," Eleanor said, taking his hand. "Our family is waiting." They walked into the celebration together, hand in hand as they had been for 20 years. 2 people who had found each other in the darkest moment and built something luminous and lasting. The girl who had prayed for death in a snowbank was gone, replaced by a woman who embraced every moment of her life with gratitude and joy. And the lonely cowboy who had been merely existing had become a man surrounded by love, purpose, and the daily miracle of a family he had helped create. That night, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Eleanor and Beckett lay in bed together, listening to the familiar sounds of their home settling around them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to treasure. But tonight they simply held each other, 2 hearts beating in sync, 2 souls who had saved each other when salvation seemed impossible. "I love you," Eleanor whispered into the darkness. "I love you," Beckett replied, the words as true and necessary as breath. And outside, the Nebraska stars shone down on Red Cloud, on the little house at the edge of town, on the family sleeping peacefully within its walls, on the life that had bloomed from the unlikeliest of beginnings. The road where Beckett had found Eleanor was quiet now, just another stretch of dirt and memories. But it had been the site of a miracle once, on a frozen winter night when a cowboy heard a dying prayer and answered it with hope, when death was transformed into life, when two broken people found wholeness in each other. That miracle continued every day in the laughter of children, the touch of hands worn from work and time, the simple, extraordinary fact of a love that had endured and would endure, tested by hardship but never broken, challenged by circumstance but always emerging stronger. Eleanor Jamison, once Eleanor Brooks, once a woman with no hope and no future, had found both in abundance. And Beckett Jamison, once a man going through the motions of living, had discovered what it meant to truly be alive. Their story, which had begun with a prayer for death in a snowbank, had become a testament to the power of compassion, the resilience of the human spirit, and the transformative nature of genuine love. It was a story without tragedy in its ending, only triumph and joy, and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived together. And on that 20th anniversary night and all the nights that followed, Eleanor slept peacefully, never once regretting that Beckett Jamison had refused to let her die, had instead given her every reason to live, and had loved her with such steadfast devotion that she had learned to love herself again. The years ahead would bring their share of sorrows and challenges, as all lives do, but they would face them together, their bond unbreakable and their commitment absolute. They would grow old watching sunsets from their porch, surrounded by the family they had built and the community they had helped shape. They would become the couple that young people pointed to as an example of what marriage could be when built on respect, patience, and genuine partnership. And when, many years later, they were both laid to rest in the Red Cloud Cemetery on a gentle hill overlooking the plains they had loved, it would be side by side, together in death as they had been in life, two souls intertwined so completely that separation was impossible. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would tell their story for generations. The tale of the cowboy who found a dying woman in a snowbank and loved her back to life, and the woman who had been brave enough to accept that love and build something beautiful from the ashes of her past. It was a love story for the ages, set against the backdrop of the wild Nebraska plains, a testament to the truth that sometimes our darkest moments are merely prelude to our finest hours, that redemption is always possible, and that real love, the kind that saves and sustains and transforms, is worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth living for. Eleanor and Beckett Jamison had proven that beyond any doubt, and their legacy lived on in every life they touched, every person they helped, every moment of kindness they extended to a world that had once been so cruel to them both. Their story ended not with death, not with tragedy, but with fulfillment and peace, and the deep satisfaction of having loved well and been loved in return. And if you had asked Eleanor in those final golden years whether she regretted anything about the path her life had taken, she would have smiled that soft, knowing smile and said exactly what she had said on her 20th anniversary. Not a single thing. Every moment of pain had led her to Beckett. Every struggle had taught her strength. Every tear had watered the garden of joy that her life had become. The snowbank where she had prayed for death had become, in the fullness of time, sacred ground, the birthplace of a miracle, the spot where two destinies had converged and been forever altered for the better. And though the snow had long since melted and the road had changed beyond recognition, the truth of what had happened there remained eternal and unchanging. That a good man had seen someone in need and chosen to help, and that simple choice had rippled out to touch countless lives, creating waves of love and hope that would never fully be measured or understood. This was their story. This was their truth. And it was beautiful beyond words, complete beyond doubt, a happily ever after earned through courage and patience and the daily choice to love even when love seemed impossible. Eleanor Brooks Jamison had found her reason to live in the kind eyes of a cowboy on a frozen winter night, and together they had built a life that honored that moment of grace every single day, a life full of light and love and laughter, a life that proved beyond question that the human heart, no matter how broken, can always heal when tended with genuine care and devotion. And so they lived, and so they loved, and so they left a legacy that would endure long after their names were forgotten, a legacy written in the lives they touched, and the love they shared, and the family they created from nothing but hope and determination, and an unwavering belief that everyone deserves a second chance, a fresh start, a reason to choose life over death. That was the gift Beckett gave Eleanor. And the gift Eleanor gave Beckett in return was showing him that his life had meaning, that his choices mattered, that he was capable of making a real difference in the world simply by being who he was, a decent man with a compassionate heart and the courage to act on his convictions. Together, they had proven that love could conquer even the darkest despair, that kindness could save lives, and that sometimes the greatest adventures begin in the most unlikely places, with the most improbable people, in moments that seem like endings but are actually miraculous new beginnings waiting to unfold.